Good morning. It's Friday, June 28th. The multi-front war in the Middle East is now 266 days old. I'm David Daoud, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, filling in for Jonathan Schanzer. Welcome back to the FDD Morning Brief. Our guest this morning is Lina Khatib. Lina, who directs the SOAS Middle East Institute and is a longtime friend of mine. Her expertise on Lebanon and Iran will certainly make for a fascinating discussion. We're so glad that she's agreed to join us today right here on the FDD Morning Brief. If you know anything about Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, you'll know that even though he and his organization can really hurt their adversaries, his bark is often far more painful than his bite. But now he's stuck. Hezbollah picked a fight with Israel on October 8th and has promised to continue attacking until a Gaza ceasefire. Not only could that be far off, but when the dust settles in Gaza, the Israelis may just decide they have unfinished business in Lebanon. October 7th fundamentally changed their perception about deceptive periods of quiet with terror organizations committed to their harm and their country's destruction. Put simply, Israelis don't want to live in the shadow of Hezbollah's menace. For now, the Israelis are pulling their retaliatory punches, allowing the international community's efforts to peacefully resolve the Hezbollah threat to run their course while they wrap up operations in Gaza. But those proposals offer no chance of solving the problem. Not really, because their enforcement depends on the apparatuses of a fickle Lebanese state that will never, ever confront Hezbollah. Meanwhile, they will only delay an inevitable Israel-Hezbollah war, and in doing so, ensure it will be even more destructive. If Israel and its threatened citizenry don't receive the security guarantees they need, the IDF may just choose to go on the offensive in Lebanon. After 8 months and thousands of attacks, Israel certainly has the legal right to do so. It'll be a painful war for Israel, but exponentially more so for Lebanon. And this time, Nasrallah can't hide behind, "if I'd only known." On that pessimistic note, here are your headlines. Germany and the Netherlands called on their citizens to evacuate Lebanon. So did Canada. Canada's foreign minister issued a stark warning to their citizens. The message: get out of Lebanon while commercial flights are still available. 24 hours later, the German and Dutch foreign ministries issued similar advisories. Berlin and Amsterdam are also worried that leaving Lebanon by air may become impossible should the clashes between Hezbollah and Israel erupt into full-blown war. Expect these travel advisories to keep coming. Kuwait has reportedly started evacuating its citizens from Lebanon, and I'm also hearing that Ireland is drawing up contingency plans for the possible extraction of its countrymen. The Canadian government is also undertaking similar prep work. In fact, Canadian troops are in Beirut getting things sorted out just in case. The second headline is that Israel reestablished working groups to focus on Iran's nuclear program. According to senior Israeli officials, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu directed his national security advisor, Tzachi Hanegbi, to reconvene the groups 2 weeks ago. There are apparently 6 teams comprised of members from Israel's defense establishment, intelligence community, and foreign ministry. Each team has a unique focus, from weaponization activities to influence operations to Iran's proxy network. This sort of whole-of-government coordinated approach to the Iran file happened under previous Israeli governments, but it apparently fell by the wayside about 18 months ago. Well, with an increasingly provocative Iran and new intelligence about the regime's possible weaponization efforts, the penny has finally dropped, as one Israeli official put it. And finally, Egypt and the United Arab Emirates are allegedly willing to participate in a post-war Gaza security force. But they do have their conditions. Cairo wants Israel to fully withdraw from Gaza, and Abu Dhabi wants to see the United States involved in the force. Unsurprisingly, both countries also want to see a pathway to a Palestinian statehood. The security force has been in the works seemingly for some time. Secretary of State Antony Blinken reportedly discussed the idea with his counterparts while he was in the Middle East 2 weeks ago. The idea is that the United States will help train a coalition of Arab troops who will operate alongside local Palestinian officers. This force would be temporary, though, remaining in commission only until the Palestinian Authority is ready to take over. I'm now pleased to introduce to you Lina Khatib. Lina and I first connected in the aftermath of Lebanon's 2019 economic protests. For a development that caused so much excitement and, in my opinion, undue optimism, even among analysts, Lina stood out as a rare, sober, and cautious voice. Significantly for us today, Lina remains one of the most dispassionately insightful voices on developments in Lebanon at a time when level-headedness is more necessary than ever. On a personal note, she's also a fellow England football fan, so we both seem to have a shared interest in hopeless causes. I'm pleased she's agreed to join us live on the FDD Morning Brief. Welcome to the FDD Morning Brief, Lina.
Wow, good to see you on a screen, and thank you for having me.
So pleasure is all ours. Lina, since it's your first time on FDD Morning Brief, how about you give our audience some background on yourself? How'd you get to your current position and why the focus on Lebanon in particular?
Well, I was born in Lebanon. I'm British Lebanese, and I have been working on Lebanon for a very long time. I have been in the think tank world for a decade and a half in various directorships at various think tanks. I'm still an associate fellow with Chatham House, with the Middle East and North Africa program, as well as now being based at SOAS as director of the Middle East Institute there. And Hezbollah in particular has been a subject of interest for me. I would say definitely since 2005 as a research interest, which is almost 20 years.
In that time, you've probably come to understand Hezbollah on a granular, almost intimate level. And with that, I want to pivot to a recent piece you wrote in the New Statesman. You write there, and I agree with you, that Hezbollah doesn't want a full war with Israel. Why is that? And what's been holding the group back from opening a full conflict since October 8th?
I mean, the difference between now and 2006, when Hezbollah had its last big war with Israel, is that at that time, Hezbollah had access to funds to compensate people in Lebanon for the losses in such a war. Gulf countries in particular were willing to give money, and they did give money for reconstruction. Iran was in a better position financially than it is today. And at the time, there was popular support for Hezbollah in Lebanon. None of those conditions exist today. In fact, most people in Lebanon do not want war, and Hezbollah knows that. Plus, this is really crucial. Israel's attacks on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon have really shown how vulnerable the group is to Israeli surveillance. So if I'm a military group, would I want to launch war when I know that my opponent knows so much about where my officers are, what I'm up to? Definitely not.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, Hezbollah wants a ceasefire probably more than Israel. And as you know, there are parallel American and French ceasefire proposals on the table meant to restore quiet to the blue line. What are their chances of permanently preventing a war between Israel and Hezbollah? Or do we just accept that war between these two adversaries is inevitable at some point in the future?
It's not inevitable. I mean, right now, the proposal for the ceasefire that President Biden has presented has been rejected by Hezbollah informally and by Hamas, also actually informally, interestingly enough. And Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, mentioned this in one of his speeches earlier in June, basically saying, why would Hamas accept a 6-week cessation of hostilities after which war may continue, and in the meantime Hamas will have lost one of its key cards, which is the Israeli hostages that it's holding. And so for Hezbollah, they want to see a ceasefire right now that is permanent, because this guarantees no change in the status quo politically or militarily, really, for Hamas and Hezbollah.
Speaking of the status quo, a lot of this depends on Hezbollah's domestic support. In May of 2022, Hezbollah won 356,000 votes during Lebanon's legislative elections. It was the most of any party in terms of votes. In January, a Winnet poll showed 93% of Lebanese Shiites view Hezbollah positively, 89% of them very positively. Are these accurate metrics by which to judge Hezbollah's popularity? And if so, or if not, how popular is Hezbollah today? What could change that? And what motivates Lebanese Shiites to support Hezbollah? Does that mean they're willing to die for Hezbollah's ideological objectives?
I mean, I can't comment on particular poll numbers, but definitely the vast majority of Lebanese Shia do support Hezbollah. And it's not just because they like Hezbollah. A lot of them support Hezbollah out of fear. A lot of them support Hezbollah because they see there is no alternative when it comes to Shia political representation in Lebanon. And Hezbollah in particular has worked systematically to eliminate any other Shia political voices that could form a credible opposition to it. And this is, something we need to bear in mind, that Hezbollah rules through a carrot and stick approach when it comes to its own constituents, not just, the Lebanese at large. And so for the time being, a lot of Shia in Lebanon rally behind Hezbollah because they feel they have no other choice.
So Hezbollah's relationship to Lebanon is complicated. At the same time, we often hear that Lebanon equals Hezbollah equals Lebanon. Would you consider this an oversimplification? And if so, what is the actual nature of Hezbollah's relationship with the Lebanese state and its various apparatuses, and I think particularly importantly, the Lebanese armed forces?
Hezbollah controls the levers of the state in Lebanon, but Hezbollah does not rule Lebanon. Hezbollah, in fact, prefers to kind of be behind the scenes, able to infiltrate state institutions in decision-making positions. For example, it has a lot of control over the security services, particularly within the military. In Lebanon, it has presence in literally every state institution that you can think of in the country. And this control, which is more informal, means that it can rule without responsibility. It can kind of pretend that it's not responsible for problems, but at the same time set an agenda that the Lebanese authorities very often find themselves having to play catch up with. So, for example, when Nasrallah in a recent speech threatened Cyprus, we saw the Lebanese foreign minister immediately step into action to reassure Cyprus about its diplomatic importance for Lebanon. So in a way, Hezbollah is able to set the agenda. Hezbollah can go to war without needing permission from the Lebanese authorities, and the Lebanese authorities very often are reduced to trying to contain the risk that Hezbollah in a way creates. And all this, at the same time, has to be balanced against the political consensus system in Lebanon. That means that despite all this, Hezbollah does not have sole authority in Lebanon. And I think the political system in Lebanon plays a huge role in why Hezbollah has managed to manipulate and use the system to its advantage. But ultimately, there are other players in the system that also benefit from the status quo, which keeps Hezbollah the way it is today.
You'd mentioned something earlier that I want to go back to, and this is the fact that the Lebanese people aren't necessarily interested in war. But if we're being honest, there's also no love lost from the Lebanese populace on Israel. What does that mean practically? Does that mean the Lebanese are willing to suffer and die for this enmity or to liberate Palestine, or is it something more passive?
I mean, for Lebanese people in general, what they want is peace. What they want is for Lebanon to recover economically and to just have a normal life. We have to remember in 2005, there were talks that the former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, who Hezbollah and the Syrian regime assassinated, had been open to the idea of eventually having Lebanon normalize relations with Israel. And ultimately, I think Lebanese people want to see peace in general. They want the Israel-Palestine conflict to be resolved so that they can have this peace. But the route there has been very complicated. Of course, you have various governments in Israel that have been a hurdle. You have Palestinian politicians also be a hurdle. Hamas being obviously an entity that does not benefit from seeing this conflict resolved. US foreign policy for a long time not really stepping up to actually make this conflict a foreign policy priority for the Middle East. Same with, multiple regional actors, Iran being a big spoiler. I mean, the list of factors why this conflict has not been resolved is quite long. And for as long as this situation that is regional and international is in place, Hezbollah is going to take advantage. And the Lebanese people are unfortunately too weak to kind of stand up to it and say, no, we need to steer Lebanon in a different direction. They really tried in 2019, but the status quo in Lebanon is sadly so far impenetrable.
The path to something as simple as peace and stability seems so complicated in the Middle East. Lina, thank you so much for joining us live today on the FDD Morning Brief and for your insights.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone, here's what FDD has on tap for you today. My colleague Samantha Ravich, chair of FDD's cyber team, teamed up with US Senator Angus King on a piece for Cyberscoop, emphasizing America's growing susceptibility to severe cyber attacks. They advocate for both stronger cybersecurity defenses against digital adversaries, as well as for proactive deterrence measures designed to instill fear in our enemies should they dare to attack us. Chief Executive Mark Dubowitz is out with the latest piece from FDD, sounding the alarm about how the White House must be clear-eyed about the looming threat of a war on Israel's north. Mark's piece in the Daily Mail warns of the devastating regional conflict that could make Israel's war with Hamas seem like child's play by comparison. We're going to keep writing about this here at FDD until the message gets through. Washington must stop sending mixed signals about its willingness and ability to support Israel against Iran's most formidable proxy. And finally, my China program colleagues, Emily de la Briere and Nate Pekarsik, have a new piece out on the rapid rise of Chinese companies and the Chinese government as significant players in the expanding data sector. This, they argue, carries profound geopolitical implications. They encourage investors within and beyond the Chinese data ecosystem to better understand Beijing's intricate and problematic regulatory framework. And with that, that's another episode in the books. Read our expert analysis on our website, fdd.org, read our quick takes on X at FDD, and support our work with a tax-deductible donation at fdd.org/invest. Jonathan Schanzer will be back on Monday for another episode. I'm David Daoud. Thank you for letting me host you today on the FDD Morning Brief.